Marcus Thompson had been walking the same palace corridors for 15 years. Every morning at 6 sharp, he would put on his crisp blue uniform, polish his brass buttons, and begin his rounds through the ancient halls of Windermere Palace. The routine never changed. Check the East Wing, walk through the throne room, inspect the gardens, and end at the royal chambers. It was a life of predictable patterns, and Marcus had grown comfortable with that predictability. But on this particular Tuesday morning in October, something felt different. The autumn air carried an unusual chill through the palace windows, and the morning light seemed to cast shadows in places where shadows had never fallen before. Marcus shook off the strange feeling and continued his rounds, his polished boots echoing against the marble floors. The palace had stood for over 3 centuries, housing 12 generations of the royal family. Its walls held countless secrets, whispered conversations, and hidden passages that most people had forgotten about long ago. The current king, King Edward VII, was a kind but distant ruler who spent most of his time in meetings with government officials. The palace staff rarely saw him except during official ceremonies. As Marcus made his way through the East Wing, he noticed something odd about the morning light streaming through the tall windows. The sun was hitting the wall at just the right angle, revealing what looked like a faint outline of a door that had been painted over. He had walked past this wall thousands of times, but he had never noticed anything unusual about it. Curious, Marcus approached the wall and ran his hand along the surface. The paint felt different in that particular spot, slightly raised and bumpy, as if something had been covered up underneath. He pressed gently against the outline, and, to his surprise, he felt the wall give slightly under pressure. His heart began to race. In all his years of service, Marcus had never discovered anything like this. Palace security was his responsibility, and finding a hidden door could mean there were security risks he wasn't aware of. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, then pressed harder against the wall. Suddenly, a section of the wall swung inward with a soft click, revealing a narrow, dark passage behind it. Cool air rushed out from the opening, carrying with it the smell of dust and old paper. Marcus stepped back, startled by what he had uncovered. The passage stretched into darkness, and he couldn't see where it led. For a moment, Marcus considered reporting his discovery immediately to his supervisor, Captain Williams. Protocol demanded that any unusual findings be reported right away, but something held him back. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe it was the feeling that he was on the verge of discovering something important. He decided to investigate further before involving anyone else. Marcus pulled out his flashlight and stepped carefully into the hidden passage. The walls were made of old stone, much older than the painted walls of the main palace. The passage was narrow, just wide enough for one person to walk through comfortably. As he moved forward, his footsteps echoed softly in the confined space. After walking for about 50 feet, the passage opened into a small, circular room. Marcus swept his flashlight around the space, revealing something that took his breath away. The room was filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, paintings leaning against the walls, and several large wooden chests scattered around the floor. But what caught his attention most were the documents scattered across an old wooden desk in the center of the room. The papers looked yellowed with age, and some were tied together with faded ribbons. Marcus approached the desk carefully, his flashlight beam dancing across the mysterious papers. The first document he picked up made his hands tremble. It was a letter dated September 15, 1953, written in elegant handwriting. The letterhead bore the royal seal, and it was addressed to someone named Margaret Ashford. As Marcus began to read, he realized he was holding something that could change everything he thought he knew about the royal family. The letter spoke of a secret marriage, a hidden child, and a conspiracy to keep the truth from the public. It mentioned names that Marcus didn't recognize, but spoke about them as if they were members of the royal family. The letter was signed by King George VI, King Edward's grandfather, who had died over 70 years ago. Marcus set the letter down with shaking hands and picked up another document. This one was a birth certificate, also dated 1953, for a child named Thomas Ashford. The father's name was listed as Prince William Charles, and the mother was Margaret Ashford. Marcus had never heard of a Prince William Charles in the royal family history he knew. As he continued examining the documents, a picture began to emerge. 70 years ago, there had been a secret within the royal family, something so important that it had been hidden away in this secret room. The documents suggested that a member of the royal family had secretly married a commoner and had a child, but the marriage and the child had been kept hidden from the public. Marcus found photographs tucked between the papers. They showed a young man in a royal military uniform standing next to a beautiful woman in a simple white dress. In some of the photos, they were holding a baby. The young man looked remarkably similar to the current king, but these photos were clearly taken decades before King Edward was born. The more Marcus read, the more he realized the significance of what he had found. If these documents were authentic, they suggested that there was a branch of the royal family that had been completely erased from official history. This Thomas Ashford, if he was still alive, would be in his 70s now. And if the documents were correct about his parentage, he might have a legitimate claim to the throne. Marcus spent hours in the secret room, carefully reading through every document and examining every photograph. The story that emerged was both fascinating and troubling. According to the papers, Prince William Charles had been the older brother of King Edward's father. He had fallen in love with Margaret Ashford, a teacher from a small village outside the capital, and had secretly married her in 1952. When Margaret became pregnant, the royal family faced a crisis. A secret marriage to a commoner was scandalous enough, but a child from that marriage would complicate the line of succession. The documents suggested that the royal family had made a decision to hide the marriage and the child, officially declaring that Prince William Charles had died in a hunting accident. But, according to these hidden papers, Prince William Charles had actually been sent away to live under a different identity. Margaret had been paid to keep quiet about the marriage and had raised their son Thomas in secret. The documents included regular reports about the child's well-being and education, suggesting that the royal family had continued to monitor the situation for many years. As the morning turned into afternoon, Marcus realized he needed to make a decision about what to do with this information. The documents, if they were genuine, represented one of the biggest royal scandals in modern history. They suggested that the current line of succession might not be legitimate, and that there was a rightful heir who had been living as an ordinary citizen for 70 years. But Marcus also understood the implications of revealing this information. It could destabilize the monarchy, cause a constitutional crisis, and potentially destroy the lives of innocent people who had been living with this secret for decades. The current king, Edward VII, would have known nothing about this, as it had happened before his father was even born. Marcus carefully gathered the most important documents and photographs, making sure to leave everything else exactly as he had found it. He sealed the secret passage and returned to his regular duties, but his mind was racing with questions. Who else knew about this secret room? Had anyone else discovered these documents over the years? And, most importantly, what was the right thing to do with this information? As evening approached, Marcus made his final rounds of the day, but he couldn't concentrate on his usual routine. Every hallway, every room, every corner of the palace now seemed to hold the potential for more secrets. He wondered how many other hidden passages existed, how many other family secrets were buried within these ancient walls. When his shift finally ended, Marcus walked home through the quiet streets of the capital city, the weight of his discovery heavy on his shoulders. He had always thought of his job as simple and straightforward, but now he realized he had stumbled into something much larger and more complicated than he had ever imagined. That night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling, the documents hidden safely in his bedroom. He thought about Thomas Ashford, who might be living somewhere as an ordinary citizen, completely unaware that he could be the rightful king of the country. He thought about the current royal family, who might be living their lives built on a foundation of lies and cover-ups. By morning, Marcus had made his decision. He couldn't ignore what he had found, but he also couldn't rush into revealing information that could change the course of history. He needed to investigate further, to verify the authenticity of the documents, and to understand the full scope of what had been hidden for 70 years. The secret room had given him the first pieces of a puzzle, but he sensed there was much more to discover. Marcus returned to work the next day with a new purpose. He would continue his regular duties as a palace guard, but he would also begin a careful investigation into the royal family's hidden past. He had become the keeper of a secret that had been buried for 7 decades, and he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it might lead. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus discovered the secret room, and he had spent every free moment researching the names and dates mentioned in the hidden documents. He visited the National Library during his days off, carefully searching through old newspapers and historical records. What he found only deepened the mystery. The official records showed that Prince William Charles had indeed died in a hunting accident in November 1953, just 2 months after the birth certificate found in the secret room was dated. But Marcus noticed inconsistencies in the newspaper reports from that time. Some papers mentioned that the prince's body was never recovered from the river where he supposedly drowned. Others reported that the funeral was held with a closed casket due to the condition of the body. Marcus also discovered that Margaret Ashford had existed. She appeared in village records as a schoolteacher who had suddenly left her position in late 1953 and moved away. After that, her name disappeared from all public records, as if she had simply vanished from existence. During his shifts at the palace, Marcus began paying closer attention to the older staff members. He especially watched Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the head housekeeper who had worked at the palace for over 40 years. She was one of the few people who might have some knowledge of events from the 1950s, even if she had only heard stories from older staff members. One afternoon, while Mrs. Hartwell was supervising the cleaning of the throne room, Marcus decided to approach her carefully. He pretended to be interested in the palace's history for personal reasons. "Mrs. Hartwell," Marcus said, "I've been wondering about the palace's history. My grandmother always told stories about working in great houses, and I'm curious about what it was like here in the old days." Mrs. Hartwell looked up from her clipboard, her gray eyes twinkling with interest. She was a woman who clearly enjoyed sharing stories about the palace's past. "Oh, Mr. Thompson, this palace has seen so much history," she said, setting down her work. "I've only been here since 1980, but when I started, there were still staff members who had worked here since the 1940s. They had some fascinating stories." "What kind of stories?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Mrs. Hartwell glanced around to make sure no one else was listening, then leaned closer to Marcus. "Well, there were always rumors about the royal family. You know how these old places are full of gossip and speculation. Some of the older housekeepers used to whisper about Prince William Charles." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat, but he kept his expression neutral. "Prince William Charles? I don't think I've heard that name before." "Most people haven't," Mrs. Hartwell said, lowering her voice even further. "He was King George's eldest son, older brother to the current king's father. The official story is that he died in a hunting accident, but some of the old staff always questioned that story." "What did they question about it?" Marcus asked. Mrs. Hartwell looked thoughtful for a moment. "Well, Mrs. Patterson, she was the head housekeeper before me. She used to say that Prince William Charles had been acting very secretively in the months before his supposed death. He would disappear from the palace for days at a time, and when he returned, he seemed different somehow. Happy, but also worried." "Did Mrs. Patterson have any theories about what was happening?" Marcus pressed gently. "She always suspected he had fallen in love with someone inappropriate," Mrs. Hartwell replied. "Someone the royal family wouldn't approve of." Mrs. Patterson said there were whispered conversations between the king and queen during that time, very serious discussions that would stop whenever staff members entered the room. Marcus absorbed this information carefully. It aligned perfectly with what he had read in the hidden documents. Did Mrs. Patterson ever mention anything specific? Any names or details? Mrs. Hartwell shook her head. "Not really. She did mention once that after Prince William Charles died, there was a period when certain areas of the palace were declared off-limits to staff. Some renovation work was supposedly being done, but Mrs. Patterson said she never saw any workers or heard any construction sounds." This detail made Marcus's pulse quicken. Could the secret room have been sealed during that time? Had the royal family hidden the evidence of Prince William Charles's secret marriage immediately after his supposed death? Where were these off-limits areas? Marcus asked, trying to sound only mildly curious. "I believe it was parts of the East Wing," Mrs. Hartwell said. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that some rooms were completely sealed off for several months. When staff were finally allowed back into those areas, Mrs. Patterson said everything looked different, as if walls had been rebuilt or moved. Marcus thanked Mrs. Hartwell for the interesting stories and returned to his duties, but his mind was racing. Everything was starting to fit together. The royal family had clearly gone to great lengths to erase Prince William Charles from history, and they had sealed away any evidence of his secret marriage and child. That evening, Marcus returned to the secret room with a more systematic approach. He had brought a small camera to document everything he found, and he spent hours photographing each document and organizing them chronologically. As he worked, he began to notice details he had missed during his first visit. Among the papers, he found a series of letters between King George VI and a man named Sir Robert Blackwood, who appeared to be some kind of royal advisor or lawyer. These letters discussed the logistics of hiding Prince William Charles and his family, including arrangements for new identities and financial support. One letter, dated December 1953, contained particularly shocking information. Sir Robert Blackwood had written to inform the king that Prince William Charles was having difficulty adjusting to his new life in hiding. The prince was reportedly struggling with depression and guilt over abandoning his royal duties and leaving his family behind. Another letter from early 1954 revealed that Margaret Ashford had been moved to a small town called Millbrook, about 200 miles from the capital. She had been given a new identity as Margaret Thompson, a widow with a young son. The letter mentioned that she would receive a monthly allowance for the rest of her life in exchange for her continued silence. Marcus was particularly intrigued by a series of photographs that seemed to document Thomas Ashford's childhood. The pictures showed a young boy growing up in what appeared to be a modest but comfortable home. Some photos included an older woman who might have been Margaret's mother, and occasionally, there were pictures of a man who looked very much like Prince William Charles, though he was dressed as an ordinary citizen rather than in royal attire. The most recent documents in the collection were dated 1965, 12 years after the initial crisis. These papers suggested that the royal family had continued to monitor the hidden family for over a decade. There were school reports for Thomas Ashford, showing that he was an intelligent and well-behaved child who excelled in his studies. But after 1965, the documentation stopped abruptly. Marcus found no records of what happened to any of the people mentioned in the papers after that date. Had the royal family stopped monitoring them? Had something happened to end their involvement? Or had the documents simply been moved to a different location? As Marcus studied the photographs more closely, he noticed something that made him freeze. In one of the later pictures, young Thomas Ashford was wearing a distinctive silver locket around his neck. The locket was clearly visible in several photographs, and Marcus could make out what appeared to be a royal crest engraved on its surface. This locket could be crucial evidence. If Thomas Ashford still had it, if he was even still alive, it could help prove his identity and validate the documents Marcus had found. But how could Marcus possibly locate a man who had been living under a false identity for 70 years? Marcus decided to focus his research on the town of Millbrook, where Margaret Ashford had supposedly been relocated. During his next day off, he drove the 200 miles to the small town, hoping to find some trace of the hidden royal family. Millbrook was a quiet, picturesque village with a population of about 3,000 people. It had the kind of close-knit community where longtime residents would remember families who had lived there decades ago. Marcus started his investigation at the local library, where he hoped to find old phone directories and newspaper archives. The librarian, a friendly woman named Janet, was happy to help Marcus search through the historical records. When he asked about families named Thompson who had lived in Millbrook during the 1950s and 1960s, Janet's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh yes, I remember the Thompson family," Janet said. "I was just a child then, but Margaret Thompson was quite well known in the community. She was a single mother, which was unusual at that time, but she was very respectable. She worked as a seamstress and was active in the local church." "Do you remember anything about her son?" Marcus asked. "Thomas Thompson? Oh yes, he was a lovely boy, very polite and well-educated. He was a few years older than me, but I remember he was quite popular at school, very intelligent, and he had this unusual way of speaking, almost like he came from a more refined background than most of us." Marcus felt his excitement building. "Do you know what happened to the family? Are they still in the area?" Janet's expression became more serious. "Well, that's a sad story. Margaret Thompson died in a car accident in 1967. It was quite shocking for the community. As for Thomas, he left town shortly after his mother's funeral. I heard he went to university somewhere, but he never returned to Millbrook. No one here has heard from him since. This information was both encouraging and disappointing. It confirmed that the Thompson family had indeed lived in Millbrook, matching the information in the hidden documents. But it also meant that Thomas Ashford, or Thomas Thompson as he had been known, had disappeared into the wider world over 50 years ago. Marcus spent the rest of the day in Millbrook, visiting the local church and cemetery where he found Margaret Thompson's grave. The headstone was simple and bore only her assumed name, with no mention of her true identity or royal connections. Standing beside the grave, Marcus felt the weight of the secret he was carrying. This woman had given up her true identity and lived her entire life hiding the truth about her royal marriage. As Marcus drove back to the capital that evening, he reflected on everything he had learned. The evidence was mounting that the documents in the secret room were authentic. Prince William Charles had indeed secretly married Margaret Ashford, and they had hidden their child to protect the monarchy. But the trail had gone cold in 1967, and Thomas Ashford's current whereabouts remained a complete mystery. When Marcus returned to work the next day, he found himself looking at the palace with different eyes. Every corner, every corridor, every official portrait seemed to be hiding secrets. He wondered if the current king had any knowledge of his family's hidden history, or if the secret had died with the previous generation. As he walked through the East Wing where he had made his initial discovery, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. The secret door had been painted over again, and the paint was clearly fresh. Someone else knew about the hidden room, and they had been there recently. The fresh paint on the secret door haunted Marcus for days. Someone else knew about the hidden room, and they had been monitoring his activities. Every time he walked through the palace corridors, he felt eyes watching him, though he never saw anyone suspicious. The comfortable routine of his 15-year career had been shattered, replaced by constant vigilance and growing paranoia. Marcus decided to change his approach. Instead of continuing his obvious research activities, he would observe and wait. He began varying his patrol routes slightly, taking note of who else was in different areas of the palace at various times. He paid special attention to staff members he didn't recognize and visitors who seemed to linger longer than necessary. 3 days after discovering the fresh paint, Marcus noticed something unusual during his morning rounds. A man in an expensive gray suit was standing in the East Wing corridor, apparently studying the paintings on the walls. The man was middle-aged, with silver hair and an air of authority that suggested he was more than just a tourist or casual visitor. Marcus approached the man politely. "Excuse me, sir. Are you here for the guided tour? The public tours don't usually come through this section of the palace." The man turned to face Marcus, and his sharp blue eyes seemed to study the guard intensely. "No tour, thank you. I'm James Whitmore from the Royal Historical Society. I'm conducting some research on the palace's architectural history for an upcoming publication." Something about the man's manner made Marcus uncomfortable. His explanation seemed rehearsed, and his eyes kept darting toward the wall where the secret door was hidden. Marcus made a mental note to check with his supervisor about any authorized historical research being conducted in the palace. "I see," Marcus said carefully. "Do you have authorization from the palace administration for your research?" "Of course," Whitmore replied smoothly, producing an official-looking document from his jacket pocket. The letterhead appeared authentic, and the signature looked genuine, but Marcus noticed the man didn't offer to let him examine it closely. "I should be finished here shortly." Marcus nodded and continued his rounds, but he positioned himself where he could observe Whitmore without being obvious. The historian spent another 20 minutes in the corridor, taking photographs and making notes, but Marcus noticed he seemed particularly interested in the area around the secret door. After Whitmore left, Marcus immediately went to see Captain Williams to ask about the authorized research. His supervisor looked puzzled when Marcus described the encounter. "I haven't received any notifications about historical research in the East Wing," Captain Williams said, shuffling through the papers on his desk. "The Royal Historical Society does occasionally request access to certain areas, but they always go through proper channels, and I'm always informed in advance." "Should I file a report about the unauthorized visitor?" Marcus asked. Captain Williams frowned. "Let me make some calls first." If this Whitmore fellow was legitimate, there should be a record of his request somewhere in the system. If not, we'll need to investigate further. Marcus left his supervisor's office feeling more uneasy than before. If James Whitmore wasn't a legitimate historian, then who was he? And what was his interest in the exact location of the secret room? That evening, Marcus decided to conduct his own investigation into James Whitmore. He searched online for any information about historians connected to the Royal Historical Society. He found several James Whitmores, but none of them matched the description of the man he had encountered in the palace. The next morning, Captain Williams called Marcus into his office with troubling news. "I've checked with the Royal Historical Society, and they have no record of anyone named James Whitmore," Captain Williams said. "Furthermore, they haven't made any recent requests for access to the East Wing. The man you encountered was there without authorization. What should we do?" Marcus asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "We need to review the security footage from yesterday morning," Captain Williams replied. "And I want you to write a detailed report about your encounter with this man. If someone is accessing restricted areas of the palace without authorization, it's a serious security breach." As Marcus wrote his report, he realized he was facing a dilemma. He couldn't fully explain why he had been paying such close attention to the East Wing without revealing his discovery of the secret room. But if he mentioned the hidden documents, he would have to admit that he had been keeping a major secret from his supervisors for weeks. Marcus decided to focus his report on the suspicious behavior of the unauthorized visitor, without mentioning his own discoveries. He described Whitmore's interest in the walls and his evasive manner, but he didn't explain why these details had seemed significant to him. When Captain Williams reviewed the security footage, they found something disturbing. The cameras showed James Whitmore entering the palace through a side entrance that should have been locked. He had somehow gained access without triggering any alarms or being questioned by other security personnel. "This is more serious than I thought," Captain Williams said grimly. "Someone with sophisticated knowledge of our security systems gained unauthorized access to the palace. I'll need to report this to the head of palace security immediately." Marcus spent the rest of the day feeling increasingly anxious. The involvement of higher security officials would mean more scrutiny, more questions, and potentially the discovery of his own unauthorized activities. He wondered if he should come forward with the truth about the secret room, but he was afraid of the consequences for his career and his family. That evening, as Marcus walked home from work, he noticed a black sedan following him at a distance. The car stayed several vehicles behind, but it made the same turns he did for several blocks. When Marcus deliberately took a longer route home, the sedan continued following. Only when he reached his own street did the car finally disappear. Marcus barely slept that night. The realization that someone was watching him outside the palace meant that his discovery of the secret room had attracted the attention of people with resources and organization. He began to wonder if there were others who knew about the royal family's hidden secret, people who had been guarding that secret for decades. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work to find that the security situation at the palace had changed dramatically. Additional guards had been posted at all entrances, and there were new protocols for checking identification and authorization. Captain Williams informed Marcus that palace security had been upgraded due to the previous day's security breach. During his morning rounds, Marcus noticed something that made his heart race. The wall where the secret door was located had been completely repainted, and there were subtle changes to the molding and decorative elements. If he hadn't known exactly where to look, he would never have been able to find the door again. Someone had not only discovered the secret room, but they had taken steps to ensure it would remain hidden. Marcus realized that his investigation had attracted the attention of people who were actively working to protect the royal family's secret, even 70 years after the events had taken place. Desperate for answers, Marcus decided to take a significant risk. During his lunch break, he drove to a public library in a different part of the city and began researching James Whitmore more thoroughly. He used the library's computers to avoid creating a digital trail that could be traced back to him. After several hours of searching, Marcus found something interesting. There was a private security company called Whitmore Associates that specialized in protecting high-profile clients and managing sensitive information. The company's website was deliberately vague about their services, but they advertised expertise in reputation management and historical preservation. Marcus felt a chill as he read between the lines. Whitmore Associates appeared to be the kind of company that wealthy and powerful people hired to keep secrets buried. Their involvement suggested that the royal family's hidden history was still being actively protected by professional operatives. As Marcus drove back to the palace, he noticed the same black sedan following him again. This time, he was certain he was under surveillance. Someone was watching his every move, and they were making sure he knew it. When Marcus returned to work, he found a message waiting for him to report to Captain Williams immediately. His heart pounding, Marcus made his way to his supervisor's office, wondering if his unauthorized research activities had been discovered. Captain Williams was not alone in his office. Sitting across from his desk was an elegant woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing green eyes. She was impeccably dressed and carried herself with the kind of authority that suggested she was used to being in command. "Marcus, this is Lady Catherine Pemberton," Captain Williams said. "She's from the royal household's private office. She has some questions for you about yesterday's security incident." Lady Catherine studied Marcus with the same intensity that James Whitmore had shown. Her smile was polite but cold, and Marcus had the unsettling feeling that she could see right through him. "Mr. Thompson," Lady Catherine said in a cultured voice, "I understand you encountered an unauthorized visitor in the East Wing yesterday. Captain Williams tells me you were quite observant about this man's behavior. I'd like you to tell me exactly what you noticed." Marcus repeated the details from his report, describing Whitmore's suspicious interest in the walls and his evasive explanations. As he spoke, he watched Lady Catherine's reaction carefully. Her expression remained neutral, but Marcus noticed that her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly when he mentioned the specific location where Whitmore had been standing. "Did this man say anything else about his research?" Lady Catherine asked. "Any specific details about what he was looking for?" "No, ma'am," Marcus replied. "He just mentioned something about architectural history." Lady Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Thompson, I want to commend you for your vigilance. Security breaches are always concerning, but they're especially serious when they involve historical areas of the palace. Some parts of this building contain sensitive information that must be protected." The way she emphasized sensitive information made Marcus's blood run cold. Lady Catherine knew about the secret room, and she was warning him that there were consequences for people who discovered information they weren't supposed to have. "Is there anything else you think I should know about this incident?" Lady Catherine asked, her green eyes boring into Marcus. Marcus felt the weight of her stare and realized this was his moment of decision. He could confess everything about his discovery and hope for leniency, or he could maintain his silence and hope that his secret remained safe. "No, ma'am," Marcus said finally. "I've told you everything I observed." Lady Catherine studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Thompson. Please continue to be vigilant about any unusual activities in the palace. And remember, discretion is always valued in palace service." As Marcus left the office, he understood the message clearly. Lady Catherine and her associates knew about his discovery, but they were willing to let him keep his job and his life as long as he kept quiet about what he had found. The royal family secret was being protected by people with significant power and resources, and they had made it clear that Marcus was being watched. 2 months passed after Marcus's encounter with Lady Catherine Pemberton. He had returned to his regular duties, following his patrol routes and maintaining the illusion that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. He carried the weight of the royal family's secret every day, and he could feel the invisible watchers monitoring his every move. The black sedan had stopped following him, but Marcus knew he was still under surveillance. Sometimes he would catch glimpses of unfamiliar faces in crowds, people who seemed to be paying too much attention to his movements. The message was clear. He was being allowed to live his normal life, but his freedom came with conditions. Marcus had stopped his research into Thomas Ashford and the hidden royal history. The documents he had photographed remained hidden in his apartment, but he hadn't looked at them since his meeting with Lady Catherine. He told himself it was better to forget what he had learned, to go back to being an ordinary palace guard with an ordinary life. But fate had other plans. On a cold December morning, Marcus was conducting his usual rounds when he noticed a commotion near the main entrance of the palace. A small crowd had gathered, Palace staff were trying to manage what appeared to be a persistent visitor who was demanding to see someone in authority. As Marcus approached the scene, he could hear an elderly man's voice rising above the murmur of the crowd. The man sounded educated and articulate, but there was desperation in his tone. "I have information about my family's connection to the royal household," the man was saying. "I've been trying to get someone to listen to me for months. I have documents, photographs, evidence that proves my claim." Marcus froze as he saw the speaker clearly for the first time. The man was tall and distinguished-looking, probably in his early 70s, with silver hair and strong features. But what made Marcus's heart stop was the distinctive silver locket hanging around the man's neck, partially visible above his coat collar. It was the same locket Marcus had seen in the photographs in the secret room. The locket that young Thomas Ashford had worn in pictures taken over 60 years ago. Thomas Ashford was standing at the gates of the palace where he belonged, and no one would listen to him. Marcus watched as palace security prepared to escort the man away. Standard protocol was to remove persistent visitors who made claims about royal connections, as such people appeared regularly and were usually delusional or seeking attention. But Marcus knew this man was different. This was Thomas Ashford, the hidden prince who had been erased from royal history 70 years ago. He was the rightful heir who had grown up believing he was Thomas Thompson, an ordinary citizen, until something had led him to discover the truth about his parentage. Marcus faced the most important decision of his life. He could follow protocol, watch Thomas Ashford be turned away, and continue living with the secret. Or he could step forward and change the course of history. "Wait," Marcus called out, approaching the security team. "I'd like to speak with this gentleman." The head of security, Sergeant Morrison, looked surprised. "Marcus, this is just another one of those people who think they're related to the royal family. We get them all the time." "I understand, but I'd like to hear what he has to say," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Thomas Ashford looked at Marcus with a mixture of hope and wariness. Up close, Marcus could see the family resemblance clearly. This man shared facial features with the current king, and his bearing had the unconscious dignity that came from royal bloodlines. "Sir," Marcus said to Thomas Ashford, "I'm Marcus Thompson, Palace Security. Would you be willing to tell me about your claim?" Thomas Ashford straightened his shoulders and met Marcus's eyes directly. "My name is Thomas Ashford, and I believe I am the son of Prince William Charles and Margaret Ashford. I have evidence that my father was the eldest son of King George VI, and that my parents were secretly married in 1952. "That's quite a claim," Marcus said carefully. "What kind of evidence do you have?" Thomas reached into a worn leather briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I have my mother's diary, which she left to me when she died in 1967. I also have letters and photographs that I found among her belongings. And I have this." He pulled the silver locket from beneath his coat, opening it to reveal a small photograph of a young man in royal military uniform and a tiny royal crest engraved on the inside. Marcus recognized the photograph immediately. It was Prince William Charles, exactly as he had appeared in the pictures in the secret room. "My mother told me before she died that my father had given her this locket as a wedding gift," Thomas continued. "She said it contained the only photograph she had of him, and that someday I would need it to prove who I really was." Sergeant Morrison was growing impatient. "Marcus, we need to wrap this up. We can't have this man disrupting palace operations with his fantasies." But Marcus was studying Thomas Ashford's documents. The diary entries were written in the same handwriting he had seen on letters in the secret room. The photographs showed Margaret Ashford with her baby son, and there were several pictures of Prince William Charles that matched the documents Marcus had found. "Mr. Ashford," Marcus said, "why are you coming forward with this now? Why not earlier?" Thomas's expression grew sad. "I only learned the truth about my parentage a few months ago. My mother never told me during her lifetime. She raised me believing that my father was Thomas Thompson, a man who had died before I was born. It wasn't until I was going through some family documents after my wife died that I found my mother's hidden papers." "What made you decide to approach the palace?" Marcus asked. "I'm 70 years old," Thomas replied. "I don't have long left, and I have children and grandchildren who deserve to know the truth about their heritage. I'm not interested in disrupting the monarchy or claiming the throne. I just want acknowledgement of who my father was and recognition that my family exists." Marcus looked at the evidence Thomas had presented and knew it was authentic. This man was indeed the missing prince, the rightful heir who had been hidden for 7 decades. But Marcus also knew what would happen if he allowed this revelation to proceed through normal channels. Lady Catherine Pemberton and her associates would ensure that Thomas Ashford disappeared again, this time permanently. Marcus made his decision. "Mr. Ashford," he said quietly, "I believe your story, and I think I can help you. But first, we need to discuss this in private. Would you be willing to meet with me away from the palace?" Thomas looked surprised but hopeful. "You believe me?" "I have reason to believe that your story is true," Marcus replied carefully. "But the situation is more complicated than you might realize. There are people who have been working to keep your family's secret for many decades, and they won't want this information to become public." They arranged to meet that evening at a small cafe in a quiet part of the city. After Thomas left, Marcus spent the rest of his shift planning what he would do next. He knew that revealing the truth about Thomas Ashford would likely end his career and possibly put him in danger, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. That evening, Marcus brought copies of the photographs he had taken in the secret room. When he showed them to Thomas Ashford, the older man's eyes filled with tears. "These are pictures of my parents," Thomas whispered. "I've never seen most of these before. Where did you find them?" Marcus explained about discovering the secret room and the hidden documents. He told Thomas about the royal family's elaborate cover-up and the ongoing efforts to keep the secret buried. "So I was right," Thomas said sadly. "My father didn't really die in a hunting accident. He was forced to give up his identity and his family to protect the monarchy." "According to the documents I found, yes," Marcus confirmed. "Your parents' marriage was hidden because it would have caused a scandal and complicated the line of succession. Your father was officially declared dead, and you and your mother were relocated and given new identities." Thomas studied the photographs Marcus had brought. "What happened to my father? Do you know if he's still alive?" Marcus shook his head. "The documents I found only covered the first 12 years after the cover-up began. After 1965, there's no information about what happened to any of the hidden family members." They talked for hours, with Marcus sharing everything he had learned from the secret room and Thomas providing details from his mother's diary and his own memories. Together, they were able to piece together a complete picture of the royal family's decades-old secret. As the evening wore on, they discussed what to do with the information. Thomas wanted to approach the current king directly, believing that King Edward VII might be sympathetic to the truth about his family's history. But Marcus warned him about Lady Catherine Pemberton and the shadow organization that was protecting the secret. "They've had 70 years to perfect their methods of keeping this quiet," Marcus explained. "If you approach the king through official channels, they'll intercept your request and make sure it never reaches him." "Then, what do you suggest?" Thomas asked. Marcus had been thinking about this problem for weeks. "We need to go public with the story, but we need to do it in a way that makes it impossible for them to suppress. If we approach a major newspaper or television network with all the evidence at once, they won't be able to stop the story from being published." "Are you sure you want to take this risk?" Thomas asked. "You have a career, a life. This could destroy everything you've worked for." Marcus thought about the 15 years he had spent walking the palace corridors, believing he was protecting a noble institution. Now he knew that part of that institution was built on a foundation of lies and cover-ups. "Some things are more important than job security," Marcus replied. "You have the right to be acknowledged as who you are, and the public has the right to know the truth about their royal family." Over the following weeks, Marcus and Thomas worked together to prepare their evidence for public revelation. They contacted investigative journalists, historians, and legal experts who could help verify the authenticity of their documents and provide credibility to their claims. The day finally came when their story was published simultaneously in 3 major newspapers and broadcast on television news programs. The headlines shocked the nation: "Hidden royal heir surfaces after 70 years," and "Palace cover-up exposed, secret marriage and lost prince revealed." The public reaction was immediate and intense. Some people were outraged by the deception, while others defended the royal family's right to privacy. Constitutional lawyers debated whether Thomas Ashford's claim to the throne was legally valid, and historians scrambled to verify the documents and photographs. Lady Catherine Pemberton and her associates tried to discredit the story, claiming the documents were forgeries and suggesting that Thomas Ashford was a delusional impostor. But the weight of evidence was overwhelming, and independent experts confirmed the authenticity of the materials. 3 days after the story broke, King Edward VII made an unprecedented public statement. Standing before the cameras with obvious emotion, the king acknowledged the truth about his family's hidden history. After careful consideration of the evidence that has been presented, the king said, "I can confirm that Thomas Ashford is indeed the son of my great-uncle, Prince William Charles, and that he is a legitimate member of our family. The decisions made by previous generations to hide this truth were made during a different time, under different circumstances, but that does not excuse the pain and injustice that was caused to Mr. Ashford and his family." The king went on to announce that Thomas Ashford would be officially recognized as a member of the royal family and granted an appropriate title. He also established a commission to investigate whether there were other hidden secrets in the royal family's past that needed to be addressed. Marcus lost his job at the palace, as expected, but he found that he didn't regret his decision. The truth had finally been revealed, and a 70-year-old injustice had been corrected. Thomas Ashford would spend his remaining years knowing his true identity and seeing his family acknowledged for who they really were. 6 months later, Marcus received an unexpected invitation to a small ceremony at the palace. King Edward VII personally thanked him for his courage in revealing the truth, and Thomas Ashford, now known as Prince Thomas, expressed his gratitude for Marcus's help in reclaiming his heritage. As Marcus walked through the palace corridors one last time, he reflected on how much had changed since that morning when he had discovered the secret door. The hidden room had been officially opened and converted into a historical display documenting the family's secret. The truth that had been buried for 70 years was now part of the public record. Marcus had learned that some secrets are too important to keep hidden, and that sometimes the right thing to do requires sacrificing personal security for a greater good. The royal family's long-hidden mystery had finally been solved, and justice had been served for all those who had suffered in silence for 7 decades.